let's cue the music and start that word chat.
Mark Allen, welcome again to That Word Chat. Great to see you all. Today, very excited, we have Jesse Shiedlower with us. Jesse is probably, maybe best known as the author of the story of F. Let's see, the S is the story, I'm sorry, not the story of F, the F word. The F word, which I thought had a long, subtitle, and maybe I've got an edition that doesn't. I've got the paperback, but the F word, the story of the F word. Jesse is a writing adjunct professor at in the writing program at Columbia University, past president of the American Dialect Society. He worked for the Oxford English Dictionary, was senior editor at Random House Reference Department, and he was project editor there of the Historical Dictionary of American Slang. He's written a lot about words and lexicography and word changes, and he's very active on Twitter, which is where I first became aware of him. He's part of that great Twitter linguist community. And Jesse is multifaceted, as you would expect lexicographers to be. He's written for Gourmet, written bar reviews for Time Out New York, and we'll talk about bar reviews a little bit. And then very interestingly, he's he's bar manager of the Threesome Toll Booth, which is a bar in New York where you and a guest and the bartender are the only ones there. So it's an interesting concept. We'll learn a little bit about that. We're actually maybe going to try to recreate a little bit of that soon too. So Jesse, welcome. Glad to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Glad to be here, Mark. Thanks.
So you're the photo we have on you on the website is the purple hair, which most of us associate with Corey Stamper, but maybe it's a lexicography thing in general. But is this the pandemic look, or is there a color? Is it natural?
It's the pandemic. There still is some purple somewhere underneath, but it's mostly faded out. Okay. But now that salons in New York are reopening, I'll be taking care of it again this weekend, which I'm very much looking forward to.
Oh, really? Okay, so you're gonna risk getting out there and getting it done. What about the Threesome Toll Booth? Is that what are the prospects?
Well, of course, it's closed now, as all bars are, and we don't. The nature of it is such that street service is not what we do. So we have been doing bottled cocktails for the last couple of months, and when we are our current location, when we are allowed to reopen, we will be reopening, and we're very much looking forward to it. Our slogan for the 1 week we were open when the pandemic hit, before things were closed, when we weren't quite sure if it made sense to be open, if it was the right thing to do, but we were open, we disinfected everything, and we said the safest bar is the one with no other patrons. So
well, that's a good point.
We will be careful about it.
Yeah, the great risk, of course, is I suppose for you being the bartender, having people come in, you can sort of be reasonably sure that you've been socially distancing, but when people come in, that must be a little bit disconcerting.
Well, in fact, I did have a case of COVID in March, In fact, I am, at least according to what everyone thinks right now, I
Yeah.
can't be infected and I can't infect anyone. So it's a little bit less to worry about.
Yeah. So okay, well, that's good. So shall we start with the book? What tell me what
Sure.
tell me what I never realized this is actually signed. It's not signed by you. I bought it at a used bookstore years ago. So I just noticed there's an inscription at the beginning, which is great. To Brian, the baddest fucker I know and the best fucking friend in the world. I love you, you fuck, Brooke. So very sweet and very appropriate. How did the book come about?
Well, you had mentioned previously the Historical Dictionary of American Slang, which I worked on at Random House. This had primarily an academic book, and it had a very large section devoted to this word. By the way, is it appropriate to use this language on this show?
I don't know, Heather, did you give the language warning at the beginning? I think we may have forgotten that key thing, and I was the first one to use it, and I'm from the Midwest, so yes, I think it's fine. We may have to put a warning on YouTube as well, explicit language, but since we're talking about the word, I see no reason not to use it.
I prefer that as well, but I'm capable of talking about it without using the word. In any case, the Historical Dictionary of American Slang did have a very large entry devoted to the word fuck and everything related to it. And basically, we were sitting in an editorial meeting and no one had anything interesting to present. And I said, well, why don't we take the F-word material out of the slang dictionary and publish that as a separate thing, thinking that everyone would laugh. And in fact, everyone said, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And so the first edition was almost exclusively drawn from the text of HDAS itself. Later editions, including the third, which you're holding, I believe, the second there. The third edition I worked on after I got to the OED, and it's twice the size of the second edition because I had access to much more resources. Sure. But basically, this is a word that everyone is interested in and has been for a long time, but owing to the difficulties of treating various kinds of pop cultural material in the academy, it's something that there hadn't been any serious scholarly work done really until fairly recently. So, there are examples. Alan Walker Reed, the scholar, had circulated some discussion of origins and usage among other scholars, and these were collected and later published. But so there were serious people thinking about it, but for the most part, research into slang and offensive language, as again, research into various kinds of popular culture, was something that wasn't really something you could do in an academic setting until fairly recently. Right. So we had a word that people are really interested in that not much had actually been published about, and why not take this opportunity to to get the serious work in? Yeah.
So was there concern? Was this the first book probably the first popular book to treat this subject? Maybe others.
There have been books that have gone into some detail on it. This is very much more detail.
Right.
But we were, in fact, a bit concerned about what the reaction would be. And the original edition had a somewhat long warning posted on the back cover. But in fact, and rather to our surprise, no one really cared. It was pretty clear what it was about. We were not encouraging people use it. And we really haven't had any problem. I've been able to discuss it in all sorts of situations. If it were necessary, I can discuss it in great length without using the word itself. It is, in fact, it is a historical glossary of the word fuck. So it is looking at things, and there's a long historical introduction. So it's a fundamentally serious work. Again, the early editions did have somewhat humorous illustrations in them. We took that out of the latest edition. But it's nonetheless, that one does have some, the one that you have. But there haven't really been any problems with that kind of reaction to it.
Yeah. So here, so what comes to my mind is, you've written this book, The F Word, and so I can imagine you're at a cocktail party, because I imagine you go to a few cocktail parties, being having some enjoyment of cocktails, and somebody introduces you. He's the guy who wrote The F Word, and then I can imagine, instantly, whoever you're talking to has a lot to say on the subject, or maybe demurs and walks away, but maybe has a lot to say on the subject, and then soon there's a huge gathering of people just surrounding you, wanting you to say everything you know about it. Is this true, or am I off base?
People are often interested. I mean, usually the first thing people will say, and I'm sure this is very familiar to most people watching, or at least every editor watching, that as soon as you say what you do, if it's lexicographer, someone will immediately say, "Oh, I'm going to have to watch how I talk in front of you." And I usually, there are a whole bunch of responses that I would like to use but don't, and
Right.
just I sort of grimace and say it's okay, I don't give tickets or something. My favorite, Miss Manners had a suggestion for this once, when a school teacher wrote in saying, "I don't know what to say." She suggested, "That's okay, I've already formed a low opinion of you on entirely different grounds."
That's one option.
I've never actually tried, but anyway, so they will say that, and if they start talking about the F word, they will probably suggest that they know where it's from, and that it's an acronym for unlawful carnal knowledge, or fornication under consent of the king, or something like that, which it's not. In general, nothing is from an acronym. At least if anyone tells you that something is from an acronym, it's not. Of course, there are things that are from acronyms, but no one will ever say, "Hey, do you know that radar stands for radio detection and ranging, or SCUBA stands for self-contained underwater breathing apparatus?" If they say it, it's almost certainly not. So, fuck, golf, tip, cop, posh. These are not acronyms. And so, if anyone tells you something is, they're not. And fuck certainly isn't.
Right, my favorite story, personal story about that, is I was doing the Thames River cruise, and the guy was, it was great narration, and one point the guy said, wharf. The word wharf comes from warehouse at river's edge. Excuse me, warehouse at river's edge, and of course I indignantly stood up, looked at my wife in shock, shook my head. He was looking the other way and driving the boat, and I didn't correct him out loud, but anyway. So where does the word come from?
It's a Germanic word. It is related to words in most of the other Germanic languages. In fact, the English word happens to appear earliest in the historical record, which is itself kind of unusual for this sort of thing. Beyond that, there isn't much agreement. That is, people have tried tying it to other words in more distant Indo-European languages, but none of these are conclusive. There is a certain amount of debate about the earliest example, how far that goes, and one of the things I have now. So the last edition came out in 2009, and there are a number of additions and improvements that I can include since. One of them is the discovery of what is almost certainly an earlier example of the word. So some of the problems, there are words that are similar to fuck that seem as if they could have a similar meaning, or proper names that seem as if they could be related, but they're probably not, or things that have been hypothesized. Like there's an example from 1215 that is claimed in a certain book, but no one's actually found that example. So
somebody just made up
even if it's real, it's a problem. It was from a major scholar, but even if the example exists, it's probably not the word we're talking about. But no one's found it anyway. But until fairly recently, the earliest example known is from the late 15th century. It's this well-known. It's a manuscript a poem in a manuscript that's satirizing the monks of Ely, which is a town in Cambridgeshire. And the poem in question is written in macaronic verse. It's a mixture of Latin and English. And the English part of this passage has is written in a cipher. That is, each letter is replaced with the following letter of the alphabet. So the first letter of the fuck word is G. And there were things like this, not that common, but it exists. So this suggests that even at that time, the word was considered taboo. The same poem also uses the word swive, which was the usual Middle English word for sex, and that is also rendered in the same cipher.
Interesting.
And this poem has been known since the mid-19th century, and that's the earliest example. I mean, there are a number of examples from the 16th century. And by the way, every couple of years, there are a bunch of well-known examples, and every couple of years there's an article saying someone has discovered the earliest example of fuck, and it's from here, and they publish something that everyone's known about for decades and has been, and they don't bother looking at the OED, and I don't know why these articles keep appearing, but there was another case of this a couple of months ago where an extremely well-known example was circulated as being some new discovery. In any case, what was a genuinely new discovery was from an accurately dated. So this poem, we have no idea when it was actually written. We're doing it based on paleographic evidence. But a historian found an example who was reading through court records from Cheshire, market town in England, from 1310, and found several examples of one legal case where someone had perpetrated a crime, and his name, and I know this sounds very unlikely, but his name was Roger Fuck by the Navel. And this
seems
appears,
unlikely.
this appears 3 times. Again, it seems unlikely, but every other aspect of the case, like it is a legal record. It looks exactly like every other legal record. The name appears 3 times in the course of the case, each time spelt slightly differently, as is typical for legal records at the time. There's nothing at all to indicate that this is not a real example. Of course, the use in proper names of various kinds when you're talking about word origins is itself a little bit problematic. And some scholars will say that these should be regarded separately. Like, this isn't the evidence for the word itself, but it's related to it. But the question of what it precisely means is somewhat up for grabs, but I do think that the obvious interpretation, that this is an insult for someone who thinks that this is how you engage in intercourse, that's the likely interpretation.
So I got a note that my sound was a little bit off, and I switched sound to my laptop. So let me know if there's any
much
trouble.
more clear, yes.
Is it good? Good.
I'm not looking at the chats, but
yeah,
it's more clear for me.
Good. Okay. Well, as long as we can talk, that's that's the main thing. So, so there's a question that I got from somebody before the show, Susan Karts. I don't. Is Susan in? Did she make the? Maybe she would like to ask the question if she remembers how she worded it. Susan, are you around to unmute and ask your question? And if you don't want to, I can ask you a question.
Of course.
There she is.
And what is the quality of that word that makes it such a linguistic workhorse? Like, it does everything, and I don't know, are there any other comparable words that do as much heavy lifting as fuck?
Well, fuck is famously widely used in a tremendous range. There are a lot of things going for it. I mean, one is that it is in fact old and established. The sound symbolism of the word is generally felt to work well. Like, people think that it feels good to say. And by the way, there have been various studies of the psychological effects of cursing, where it turns out that cursing does affect your ability to withstand pain. you know, if you curse while you're undergoing a slightly painful thing, you can withstand more pain and so forth. So you know, it feels good to say. It's just not vulgar enough that you can use it in a wider range of meanings. So when people are discussing, you know, what is the most vulgar, you know, the most offensive word in English, you know, things like fuck and cunt and nigger come up all the time. And the reason why fuck is much more broadly used is that there's a wider range of ways these can be used. Like the other words are much more limited. I mean, cunt is more widely used in British English in a wider range of uses, but still, you know, when you go from things like, you know, from sex to, you know, violence or hurting people or moving quickly, there are so many figurative things that can grow out from that, that there's just a lot of opportunity for using it in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And we're getting several questions, so we'll hopefully have time for questions. But I want to switch gears a little bit, and because I really, it's fascinating to me, the whole story behind the threesome toll booth, which is you're the manager or bartender of this operation, you and another person.
Well, there are two of us involved. So bar manager is you know, actual but sort of meaningless title, because it's always one or the other of us, and we both run it.
Right. And it's in Brooklyn, and it's and I understand it's like not a very nice. There's no like big storefront with a sign that says "Come on in."
Well, there have been two locations, and there will be a third because
really?
with the current pandemic, our host bar. So we need to be located within another bar because we can't get a liquor license for 10 people a night. It's just not practical. So the space itself is extremely lovely. Usually the way into it is not lovely. That's partly by choice, partly by circumstance. But you know, the original location was in a rather remote industrial part of Brooklyn, you know, down in a dark alley where there's nothing else going on. When you get inside the space itself, it's extremely lovely, but some people are uncomfortable with the approach, which again is sort of intentional.
And I think that's probably what I read about. Was it in the New Yorker, where that article appeared? Yeah. Okay. I think that's where I first heard of it. But because you are a master bartender and have this place, I thought maybe we could recreate it for all of us and do a little threesome toll booth experience. And so it's you and two others. So I've asked Colleen Newvine, the regular drinking partner, to be my +1 for this experience. Colleen's the AP Stylebook's product manager, and she has been to she's experienced this. She and her husband John. So, Colleen, say hello, if you could.
Hi there.
Hi, Colleen. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Am I the only one on the call who's actually been to the threesome toll booth?
There are, just looking at the guest list, I see a few others who have been.
Okay.
Really? Oh,
Cool.
That's very impressive. Okay. I was going to say, like, not that many people have done it. When Colleen told me about it, she said this was a very, exclusive thing, which I take it is, because it's a whole evening, right? Or is it you do multiple people in an evening?
There are 5 seatings a night, lasting a bit over an hour. Obviously, they have to be scheduled, and because we are always sold out. I mean, when tickets go on sale, they sell out instantly because, again, we only fit 10 people a night. So, but if if you want to go, certainly if you know me, you email me and I'll get you on the list. But if you get in at the right time when tickets go right on sale, you can probably get a reservation.
Okay, all right, good to know, good to keep in mind. So we're gonna try. So we're gonna make a drink. We're gonna do like a cooking segment. I didn't bring an apron, but we'll do like a cooking segment in the middle of the afternoon talk show. and you're going to show us, Colleen and I, how to make a drink.
Mhm.
Now, Colleen's husband is a bartender. Actually, I have John's book. John Tebow, Colleen's husband, actually wrote a book about where to go, bars, taverns, and dives New Yorkers love, where to go and what to drink. And John illustrated the bars. He's an artist and wrote about all the places to go. So we'll pitch that. And Colleen, before we do this, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, AP Stylebook is now out and shipped. Oh, there it is. I didn't get mine.
Did you order it? That helps.
Yeah, I ordered it. Yeah. There was a mix-up. No. I said, I wrote the other day. I said, I need my style book. And somebody just said, okay, we're mailing it. So
okay, good.
I don't know. I'm on the bad list for some reason. I didn't get it, but hopefully it's in the mail. But is it? Are you calmed down now? Was it crazy to try to put it out during the pandemic?
I mean, the thing that was weird was how normal production of the style book felt this year. Like I kept waiting for our printers in our warehouse to say, no, actually, you'll have a book in August. Yeah. But every step along the way, they really figured out how to do social distancing. You know, if you've ever seen a printing press run, you don't have to have people within 6 feet of each other.
So what happened at this point of the recording, the internet went out. The Wi-Fi went out at my house for a few minutes. I came back on. We made a drink. This is the plan for the show was to make a cocktail all together, and we did, and it worked out well. And then we realized the recording wasn't on again. So what was there is lost forever. But you know, it's making a drink. You can find a video online of how to make a cocktail, and then we got back into talking about words. So that's where we'll pick up. A few minutes later, drinks in hand, we go back to talking to Colleen for a little bit. The recording cut out when I left. So whatever you did while I was gone, I'm not sure, that may be lost forever. We'll have to, through the magic of editing, have to splice it together somehow. Colleen, you're working on a book, correct?
I am working on a book. And I've been working on this for a little while, but it's suddenly become weirdly timely. So it's on what I call manageable sabbaticals. So those of you who I've known for a while in the ACEs community know that I've done this several times. I've gone and lived with my husband in New Orleans for a month or two at a time. Multiple times we went and lived for a month out in San Francisco. And we lived in a converted garage out in a beach town on Long Island. I've been writing about this because people always ask, in the spirit of this conversation, how the fuck do you do that? But interestingly now, you know, living in New York, it seems like everybody who can get out has figured out a way to get out. So there's sort of people who go and do it for a life adventure, and now there's this timely element of people who are going because they were feeling caged up under house arrest. So yeah, that's what I'm working on in addition to the style book.
Yeah, cool, very cool. And we were talking earlier about, I don't know if we talked about this, but Boulevardier, we capitalize it. It's not an AP style book. A lot of drinks are, but that one is not.
So AP style is that any drink that's named for a proper name is capitalized. So a Manhattan is up, but a Boulevardier would be lowercase. Cosmopolitan would be lowercase.
What if Boulevardier is named after a book titled Boulevardier?
See if you can provide me that citation, then maybe I can get it up.
Oh, all right. Well, we'll definitely get this I'm hoping we have an AP Stylebook. I hope Colleen can come back and bring Paula and we can talk about AP Stylebook this time. So maybe we'll do a drink portion of that. So maybe we should make this a regular weekly thing or bi-weekly thing where we have our guests make drinks for us. Anyway, let's get back to the important issues, and that's the word fuck. So you've been observing this now for many years. How has it changed? What are your observations about how you use it? Are you find uses of it? Is it being used more? You're finding out, is social media bringing it out more to the fore, or what can you tell us about it?
There are a number of different things going on. So one of the things that social media has done, there are some ways in which social media has spread various kinds of language. The other thing it does is expose language that is normally not visible. And that's been one of the really big things. And that's one of the things that linguists are really excited about, where you have especially if people are geotagging themselves, you can do, there are people doing extremely interesting things with this. You have language that people are using all the time that you didn't have access to because they speak it and it goes away. And now they're using it online in a way that you can record and trace and analyze. And those are complementary, but they are different things. There's the development of new terms or new linguistic practices, and just exposing what is already out there, but you couldn't see. So what you've seen with the F word in the last number of decades, that yes, it has become increasingly common, and this has been the case, certainly since the 1950s or 60s or so, where it's been more, just progressively more common in different kinds of social circumstances, in a wider range of social circles, in a wider range of periodicals, where, in the 1960s, it would appear in Harper's and the Atlantic once or twice. It took until the 1990s before it appeared in the New Yorker, appearing in newspapers, very, very recently, with one or two exceptions over the years. I think the earliest appearance of fuck in a mainstream American newspaper, I think, is 1991 that I know of. But again, like a handful until the last 10 years or so, and now rather more common. It's obviously still regarded as an offensive word, but less offensive than it ever used to be. And as with most language-related things, this is paralleling what's happening in society as well. When society as a whole lessens its taboos about sexual discussions, and then the language will follow. And these things, like everything works together. So if you look at the history of the last couple of hundred years of language use, sexual terminology has always been considered relatively offensive. But let's say in the 16th century, in the 17th century, religious blasphemy was considered especially bad. Terms insulting one's parentage, words like bastard in the 17th century were written with dashes. Nowadays these terms are relatively mild because, again, as a society, we are less concerned with parentage, that kind of issue. Religious observance is generally less important to the majority of people. So expressions like goddamn, which again would have been, various points would have been written with dashes, is now considered relatively mild. At the same time, in the last couple of decades, especially racial terms, ethnic terms, national origin terms, insults, like these are very, very much worse than anything else. Where previously no one had cared too much, and now they are the most extreme terms you can use, much more so than sexual terms. This is not a question of things replacing each other, but again, like as society itself cares more and less about different things, the words that have to do with that will become more and less prominent, or more or less taboo.
Right.
Hey, Jesse, you mentioned earlier, there are sort of tiers of what we consider inappropriate words. So, if there's like your lower level damn and hell, and then there's the the F word, the C word. Do we like having that sort of stratification so that we can pull out the big guns when we really want to make an effect, or does that just sort of accidentally happen in language?
No, it's a real thing. And people sometimes say, well, now that the F word is getting more common and more acceptable, what do we use? And there isn't necessarily an answer for that. These things aren't comparable. That is, you can't, you don't start using racial terminology more commonly because, for effect, like these have different purposes. So you can't, if certain things become more acceptable, there won't necessarily be something that takes their place in that exact way. And in general, again, but this is true, it's not just of language. I mean, people talk about, one of the things when people are talking about language, they're almost always using it as a proxy for some kind of other social thing. So when people are talking about proper grammar, this is a proxy for education or social class, pronunciation, especially in Britain, is a proxy for social class. Like there's nothing intrinsically right or wrong about different pronunciations or grammatical structures. It's just that you associate them with different different educational backgrounds, different social backgrounds, different wealth backgrounds, and things like that. So over time, when we care less about these things, there won't be as much need for that. That is, when society, if society is extremely stratified, then yes, needing terms that are formal, normal, informal, extremely colloquial, like having a range of that is useful. When things are less stratified, you have less need for that. It's the same thing, dress or table manners are another good example of that. I mean, my colleague Erin McKean talks about this a lot. Like with language, people like using slang terms or using informal vocabulary. No, that's wrong. You should never do that. Well, no, like if you're writing formal things for edited print sources, you might argue that you shouldn't use that. But it doesn't mean it's wrong, in the same way that there's a time when you're sitting at a table with tablecloths and you have a napkin on your lap and you don't put your elbows on the table. And there's a time when you're sitting on the ground eating fried chicken with your hands, and no one says that's wrong. You just understand that that's a thing appropriate for a different circumstance. So again, same with language. There's a time when you can use more colloquial language, and this is not a problem. And there are times, fewer of them, when everything should be extremely formal.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we're getting toward the end of our time, and we have at least a few questions. Heather, what do we have lined up in terms of questions from the crowd?
So we have one from Kate Karp. Kate, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Okay. It's disappeared in the chat. Let me see if I can find it.
What did it have to do with, Kate?
It had to do with the fact that the F fuck and shit have kind of an attitude in English. And are there words in other languages that have the same impact? I mean, I thought about the French for shit, that's merde, and it's almost pretty, but I don't know how that feels to a French person.
Yeah, so again, there are a lot of things going on here when you're trying to look at this. People like, what's the equivalent of fuck in some other language? And there isn't necessarily one. And like the nature of slang, for example, is there slang in this or that language? You're talking about just social distinctions or things that might not exist in other languages. Like in order for there to be something along the lines of what we regard as slang, as English speakers regard as slang, you need to have some kind of formal educational system and a sense that there is a higher and lower way of using the language, formal and informal way of using things, things to rebel against by using a particular form of language, standard synonyms that the slang is substituting for, a whole bunch of things like that. And certain cultures don't, like, things don't work that way. So, to say that there is slang in a language of some very widely differing culture, you're often talking about something different where, language might be inappropriate in a certain circumstance, but it's for, religious reasons or historical reasons or something like that. In most Western cultures, the words that are considered slangy tend to be in similar categories, as you have terms for sex, terms for bodily functions or bodily parts. You have terms for acts of violence, the state of drunkenness or drug intoxication. Like, these are categories that typically generate a lot of slang. But even in relatively closely related societies, there are still a lot of differences. Again, as I keep saying with language, as with everything else. So in France, if you look at French slang versus English slang, French slang does not have the same obsession with breasts that English slang does. English slang, like, tons and tons and tons of words for breasts. French slang does not have much at all. And similarly, beaches in France, you're more likely to see bare-breasted women. That's just, it's a difference. It's a national difference. And again, these are, relatively closely related cultures. If you're talking about something very widely different, the language is going to be extremely different, and the kinds of words that are considered offensive or not are going to be different. But acknowledging that there are tremendous differences, most Western cultures do have things that are do have words in these various categories that would be regarded as slangy or offensive, and fall into at least the same general range as they do for us.
I wanted to add, that's a great question, Kate. I wanted to ask something completely different, and while we still have a minute, I think I actually probably refer to you as a linguist when I introduce you. I don't think that's true. You're a lexicographer, and we all know the lexicographers come from all sorts of different. Is your background in linguistics, or how do you
first of all, lexicography is in fact a branch of linguistics. So okay. Lexicographers are linguists.
So I can say that. Okay.
Yeah. Most lexicographers do not actually come from a linguistic background. Some do, but typically lexicographers are recruited from a more general humanities background. A lot of them, you have a lot of lexicographers who were originally medievalists, myself included. Robert Birchfield, who's the editor of the OED supplements, was did his PhD on the Ormulum, the 13th century Middle English poem. Philip Gove, the editor of Webster's Third, actually has his PhD in 18th century travel, I think, nautical narratives or travel narratives. So it's more usual for a lexicographer to be from a humanities background, from actual linguistics degree, especially nowadays. Modern linguistics programs are looking at concerned with different things from what most lexicographers are doing.
So what was your background? How did you get into it?
Well, I was a classics major as an undergrad, but always interested in history of the English language kinds of things. I did some graduate work in early English history and linguistics and history. I was working in, dropped out of grad school, was working in publishing, and doing some freelance work for the OED. I'd started doing some freelance work for the OED when I was in grad school, kept doing that, was working in general publishing at Random House. A colleague of mine, a friend of mine there who worked for the dictionary department, left to work for a magazine, and I got his job.
Okay. And I think we have at least one more question, maybe a couple.
We do, yes. Brianne had one. Brianne, if you want to unmute.
Hi, Jesse.
Hello.
So my question is for you as a researcher. For you, do you still have unanswered questions about the history of fuck? And if so, like, what kind of evidence would help answer that? Would it be antedating? Would it be finding it in a new context or genre?
Well, the biggest problem when you're talking about this kind of language, the biggest problem is that most of it was not written down. presumably. Again, the very first example, I mean, forgetting about this legal case, the very first example was already written in a cipher, showing it was taboo then. The examples from the next couple of centuries, there are a number of them, but not, very much less than we would think based on how much we can assume was out there. And there is, in fact, a lot of evidence that has only been recently uncovered that shows this was really very common. We just don't know that. So one of the things, an area that I find extremely interesting and where there's a lot of potential is legal documents. Because first of all, these are things that are exactly dated and located. But when offensive terms are part of a legal dispute, they get written down. And you can find that in the record, and people preserve legal records. So in the last couple of decades, when more and more legal records have been digitized, you can search these things much more easily, and you find absolutely incredible things. So for example, I mean, I have many, many examples of this, not just connected to the word fuck, but connected to many different words, where we know a lot about something because of its preservation of these terms in legal sources. So there are a few examples that I talk about in the introduction to the F word. One of the earliest examples known in America was an example in a court case, actually two very similar court cases in the 1840s and 1860s, where, in one case, a man had been convicted of slander. He had said about a woman, I have fucked Rebecca Kelly 100 times. I have screwed Beck Kelly 100 times. And he was convicted of slander, and he appealed, saying, the word that you're saying I said doesn't exist. It's not in dictionaries. Therefore, what I said did not imply whoredom. So the judge rejected this appeal and wrote, again, this is all on the record, because the this word, while not to be found in our dictionaries, is nonetheless a common word well known to anyone who hears it. The fact that the modesty of our lexicographers prevents them from recording it does not affect that. And again, there was an exactly similar case where a sexual case where the question of the existence of the word fuck was exactly at issue. And again, the judge wrote, no, this is widely known. Everyone knows this, it's a common word. So, a single example of this tells us more about the use of the word in the 19th century than all the other, than what you can extrapolate from negative evidence. Like, we assume people were using it, but like we have one example or whatever examples from, Victorian pornography, and we think that, well, examples like this tell us a lot. And there are, in fact, a smattering of those. So I think, future research, this is going to be a great place to look. I mean, continue looking at legal sources. And of course, in many cases, the sources we do have, it's expurgated there, so there will be dashes or asterisks, or the entire word is omitted. But so you can't just do it with a database search. You still have to read through them. Again, I can give example after example where we know a lot about something by this kind of metadata comments by judges in legal cases.
Awesome, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, thank you for that question. We are running a little bit late, but I missed out because my Wi-Fi went out and I had to. So I missed 10 minutes. So I'm going to count this as being still an hour. I think we have at least one more question. If we've got most of the people in the room, we'll do one more question maybe, and then wrap it up. Is that possible, Heather?
So we do have one more from Aaron. Aaron, if you want to unmute.
Hey, everybody. Hey, Jesse. I'm a Boulevardier devotee, and so thank you for the mouth-watering example. I appreciate that. And so I have a comment. It's more of a comment than a question, an observation, and then I hope it'll spur a thought. I learned my Spanish in Argentina, and coger in Argentina means to fuck, And last summer I was in Madrid and walking through El Corte Inglés, the department store, and there was a sign up in the music department that said, "No coger los ukuleles." And I was like, that can't be right. And there was something really off. And then I had to ask somebody local in Castilian Spanish, coger is inoffensive. It means to touch or maybe take away. And I just wondered if those kinds of, I'm not sure, a regional variant. I mean, obviously Spanish has tons of different vocabularies, I guess. And I'm just curious if that spurs a thought on fuck in other languages.
Certainly, in Spanish, there's a tremendous variety within Spanish, lots of different terms where I think the most recent thing I saw was a list of different words for a police baton, where there's something like 25 different words for the, like every country has its own terminology for like slang terms, for this implement. First of all, things do change over time. People have mentioned French before. I mentioned baiser, which literally means to kiss, now has almost exclusively a sexual meaning. You can't use it anymore in the literal sense. But yeah, I mean, it depends. It can depend on a lot of things. Sometimes you can just have different words for different things in different variety, or different words for the same thing in different dialects. In some cases, you're looking at other factors where other varieties just have different attitudes towards different kinds of language. So, for example, excuse me, it's a widely remarked upon fact that many of the earliest examples, like the 16th century examples, there's a tremendous number of examples from Scots. And is like, does this mean that that fuck was Northern or Scots term, or does it just mean that the Scots were more willing to write about or talk about sexuality? Probably probably the latter. So if you're looking at when you're looking at Spanish varieties, that's one of the things you're looking at, different attitudes among different countries. And this isn't entirely related, but perhaps people will find it amusing because you did specifically say Argentine Spanish. There's one of my favorite dictionary definitions. It's an entry from a dictionary of Argentine Spanish from 1910. And again, it's a Spanish dictionary. There's a Spanish dictionary written in Spanish for Spanish. And they were defining a word which it's an adjective that describes a man who enjoys performing cunnilingus. And it was defined in the dictionary, but that's not the definition that's not how it was defined. It was defined as, I don't have the precise language in front of me, but this is a word well known to degenerates. And I will leave it to them to say what this word means, because my pen should not write down such a horrible thing. It is well known in the capital city. So
that's very Johnsonian in a way. So thank you so much for being here. You know what? There's one more question. I have to ask this because we had Steve Klein-Edler and Corey Stamper were on our second show, and Steve mentioned lexicographer movie night at Jesse Shiedlower's place. And what is that? I mean, I assume, I think we've had a question on a different show where we had Peter Talk Philosophy and Alan Chase. Somebody asked, do all the lexicographers know each other? So did you is there like a mailing list? You're all on a text group and WhatsApp, and you just brought all the lexicographers together to watch a movie?
Well, yes, we all know. There aren't many of us, and we do all know each other. And in this case, this was after a meeting. There's a society in New York devoted to dictionary-related things, and they're Metrolex, it's called. Ben Zimmer organizes this, and some other people. There used to be meetings every month or every other month, and now, well, sort of on hiatus, devoted to different dictionary-related things. And after one of these meetings, yes, a half dozen people came back to my apartment, and we watched one of the very few movies about dictionaries called The Great Passage, which is a Japanese movie. It's a movie based on a novel. There's also an anime series based on this, which is in fact about lexicography. You know, it's about writing a dictionary. And none of us, I held off seeing it. I had just gotten it and had held off seeing it. And we all watched it together, and it was an immensely gratifying experience because, first of all, it was a terrific movie, but despite the fact that the Japanese lexicographic tradition is very different from anything that we were familiar with, and I know almost nothing about it, nonetheless, almost every aspect of this movie was entirely familiar to everyone there. You know, ranging from the pressure from the marketing people to get things done faster, and the social awkwardness of the lexicographers. Everything was just it's a terrific movie. I highly recommend it. But yeah, that was that event.
All right. All right. Well, that's it's wonderful to think about that. And thank you so much for coming by. Sorry we had some technical difficulties. First with my sound, and then with my Wi-Fi going out, which I said, like I said, it's never happened before, but it sounds like you were able to continue on, so we appreciate it. Tomorrow we have the premiere on YouTube of Roy Peter Clark tomorrow? Yeah, Roy Peter Clark is tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. on YouTube. So that's one that we did several weeks ago, but we'll have him as a YouTube premiere. So you can tune in at 4:30 and do this all over again, and it won't be quite as interactive. It'll be YouTube. So thank you very much, Jesse. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.